The basketball court at Fountain Central High School in Petersburg, Indiana, is called Dave Sanders Court. Dave Sanders had been a student there more than 50 years ago, graduating in 1969. During his time at Fountain Central, Dave played basketball, baseball, and ran cross country. In his senior year, the basketball team won the sectional, and he was named the most valuable player. He served as co-captain of the basketball squad and helped the cross country team clinch a perfect record. He was one of only 9 Fountain Central basketball players to earn a college scholarship. In 1974, at the age of 23, he'd even begin a career as a high school business teacher and coach. He was a sweet, quiet kind of coach. An ESPN article said about him, "At a time when the Vince Lombardi method of coaching through intimidation was still very popular, Sanders preferred something of a soft sell." One of Dave's best friends from high school, Greg Leidy, once described him as always having a smile on his face, always thinking about other people, always putting other people in front of himself. One of Dave's daughters described him as the kind of guy who came home from work every night, poured himself a Jack and Coke, and watched Days of Our Lives with his pet miniature poodle.
Through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives.
By the academic year of 1998 to 1999, he'd been a teacher for 25 years and was considering retirement. But Dave never taught at Fountain Central High School in Petersburg, Indiana. He'd taken a job in a suburb of Denver, Colorado, right after college. And the basketball court at Fountain Central wasn't named after him because of his career as a coach there, or even because of his athletic record while he was a student there. It is named for him because on the morning of April 20th, 1999, Dave Sanders walked into work at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, and was one of 15 people who never walked out again. Dave's story is one of incredible courage and heroism in the face of unimaginable horrors. But the story of Columbine is something much darker and more painful. As Dave Cullen, the author of the definitive book on the tragedy, puts it, a tragic origin story, the template of the modern American shooting. Welcome back to Respect the Dead, the podcast where we don't. Hi everyone, I'm Hoots.
Kaylin.
And I'm Andy.
When I last presented in the chronology of releases, not in the chronology of recording dates, I talked about Timothy McVeigh and the American militia movement. But the American militia movement is only one prong of the Timothy McVeigh fork. The other prong, because we're eating with little hors d'oeuvres forks, is the era of mass shootings. Timothy McVeigh, sponsored by the Timothy. I am so sick in the head from YouTube. I swear to God, I have had no sleep, and I am just like,
I was about to say,
the Turner Diaries.
This shooting is sponsored by.
In a way. So Timothy McVeigh, inspired by the Turner Diaries and his time in the military, employed a tactic coined performance violence by sociologist and terrorist Mark Juergensmeyer. Hey, editing Hoots here. You may be wondering why I just breezed past the words sociologist and terrorist. Mark Juergensmeyer is not a terrorist. I meant to say terrorist expert. You're going to hear a lot of line flubs and dropped words from me in this episode because, as I'll elaborate on in a few minutes, as I was researching the Timothy McVeigh episodes and the Columbine episodes, I was suffering from a lot of nightmares. I wasn't sleeping very well. And by the time we got around to this part which is technically part 3 of the 4-part series, I was not doing so hot. I'm still really proud of the work that I did here. I really hope you're enjoying these episodes. It was a real treat to give myself psychic damage for all of you. And if you'd like to drop a little tip in the tip jar for me, head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/respectthedead. And who knows? I might do some more day ruining episodes. I probably will, to be honest. But maybe I'll go do another fashion designer first. Anyway, enjoy the rest of the episode. Spectacle is kind of the key to performance violence, which was why Timothy McVeigh spent months casing out targets and making weapons. He believed that he needed to have a massive amount of casualties in order to attract the attention of the government and news media. Timothy McVeigh, like all terrorists, believed in something. His performance violence had a political agenda. The Oklahoma City bombing was the most shocking event to occur in Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris's lifetimes. And they saw how the public reacted to Timothy McVeigh, how he became a household name overnight. And they craved that kind of external validation.
They couldn't start a YouTube channel? Like normal
Seriously.
people?
Oh my God. If they had started a YouTube channel just about the Oklahoma City bombings, they would be like so famous. It would have been like the first serial.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's Karen in Georgia right there.
Mm-hmm.
Just boy Karen in Georgia talking about white supremacist terrorists. I know which one's which.
Now this BuzzFeed, are you Karen or Georgia on dead school shooters?
Oh, I'm so sick. My episode is going to be, it's going to be earned, honestly. So the future Columbine killers decided to outdo Timothy McVeigh with no agenda other than self-aggrandizement. And this is the primary motivating factor of most mass shootings that have occurred in the wake of Columbine. Some shooters will leave behind manifestos, but they aren't really terrorists in the way that Timothy McVeigh was. Like, they don't actually have political goals. The Columbine killers achieved this level of infamy that is arguably greater than Timothy McVeigh's, even though he had a higher body count at the time. And a lot of subsequent mass killers have had obsessions with the Columbine killers and have expressed desires to beat their kill count. And a couple of them even have. So there's this like weird like culture of like, yeah, of like one-upping each other and outdoing each other.
That's so nasty.
There's also data to suggest that mass killers seek infamy and notoriety. And Karen and Tom Teeves, the parents of one of the Aurora shooting victims, Alex Teeves, founded the No Notoriety campaign following their son's death. No Notoriety's goals are to put pressure on media outlets to change the way they report on mass killings. No Notoriety urges news outlets to minimize harm by only reporting a killer's name once, if at all, and not disseminating a killer's photo. So I'm going to attempt throughout these episodes, there's going to be 2 of them, to use the phrase the killers or the shooters as much as possible, and only using their names when I need to identify one or the other. Tragically, though, and I know, Kaylin, you and I kind of talked about this in the group chat off mic a little bit. I think that mass killings have kind of hit like a tipping point now where they've become so common that I don't really think mass murderers do get the kind of attention and notoriety that they want anymore. So I don't really know how much good the No Notoriety.
Well, it's not original anymore.
Yeah. So I don't even know how much good that campaign does anymore, because we've just hit this like tipping point of mass. It's gone from something that you could do to become infamous to like just something you can do now.
Yeah, because they're just so often like we can't keep up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much misinformation. Like, you're going to go ahead and try and do like a mass shooting and then spend like the rest of your life being called like transgender by Republicans. Like, the glory is going to be that you're like a stinky trans woman who like wears diapers or something. Like the spin that they're putting on them, they don't get like held up as heroes in the same way, because it's always like an attempt
that they used to
push like those killings on the other side.
Mm-hmm. That specifically, like what you're referencing was the reaction to the Uvalde killer.
Yeah.
And I honestly could not tell you what his name was.
Yeah.
Like I have honestly, like I forgot the day that it happened.
Yeah.
Which I think maybe is progress. I don't know though, because like the mass killings aren't really slowing down. I think, yeah, it's probably changed from something where like you could do it to get notoriety, and now you can do it if you want to commit suicide, but you also want to take a bunch of people out with you because you're angry at the world.
Yeah.
But these guys who we're going to talk about today are still pretty famous, and they still have a number of fans, as we'll talk about in part 2. So I do want to proceed with some caution, and I hope that this being the podcast that it is, we can kind of de-glamorize them a little bit.
What a nice way to say that.
That's what we do on here, right?
Yeah, we're de-glamorizing.
That's our we're de-glamorizing.
Podcast. We de-glamorize. I like it.
That's our mission. Okay, I guess before we like properly jump in, what are your relationships to Columbine? Like, what do you know about it? We're all like around the same age, which is several years younger than the Columbine students, but we were all still like school aged when it happened. So like, what's your relationships to this tragedy that has like impacted all of our lives?
I have very specific memories of where I was and what I was doing when it happened, because I would have been in like middle school, like early middle school when that happened. And it was this is how like sheltered I am, but it was my first trip to Boston. I went with my best friend at the time and her family. We went to Boston because her dad was like a gym teacher, and there was some kind of conference. So he got put up in this nice hotel, and she was allowed to bring a friend. So I went with her. So I remember very specifically being in the hotel room watching television. We put it on the news, and they were reporting about Columbine. And it was just absolutely shocking, the idea of there being a school shooting at that time anyway. Like I remember being shocked, and now I'm so dead to it now because they happen so often. I don't have any other connection to Columbine in terms of like, I don't know anybody who ever went to that school. I don't have any friends or family or anything like that. I do remember that after that happened, I found out like a few years later at my high school that we actually had a incident where a student had a gun on campus, like before that happened, before Columbine, but luckily nothing happened. Like there was just a guy walking around with a gun basically, and nobody got hurt. There were stories about like students helping each other out and helping out like a guy in a wheelchair at one point and getting everyone off campus and running. So like nothing happened luckily, but there was this kind of vibe of like, you know, in another world that could have been the first, or that could have been linked to it somehow or something. But luckily nothing happened. And at the time it was just kind of stocked up to like, oh, somebody brought in the gun and they shouldn't have, and everything was fine. Yeah. But if that had happened like after Columbine, I think it would have been a bigger deal.
Yeah, there had been school shootings before, but it was always like, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 people died, and it was like very much a targeted thing. Like somebody would bring in a gun and be like, I'm going to kill fucking Jim. I hate Jim. I'm going to kill Jim. I'm going to kill Jim's best friend. And that's the end of it. But like this was the first time that it was like just terrorism. Indiscriminate killing. Yeah.
Right.
Kaylin, you're Canadian. What is your relationship? Yeah. Sorry, Mandy. What were you saying?
Oh, the only other thing I was going to say is in high school, we also did a play about a school shooting.
Jesus.
Fuck, what was it called?
No.
Please tell me you have it on like VHS or whatever.
No, I don't. I don't think so.
Do you remember your lines?
I don't. Maybe somebody else does. Because like I was like random character. Like I was like one of the chorus basically that represents like the students who are like haunting this guy after the fact. But like, so like I die, but like you don't see me die on stage. Like
that's so funny.
But like I remember it had some very specific, because it's like one of those plays that gets done a lot, I guess, or it used to. Maybe doesn't now at this point. But like, it had very specific rules about how you were supposed to do it. So like, for example, you are not supposed to use actual guns on stage. You can mime holding a gun, but you are not to have an actual gun at all.
Like nothing even gun shaped, right?
Nothing gun shaped.
Yeah.
I think there's like one scene where he picks up a stick. but like that's like the closest we could do. And the other thing was you weren't supposed to use fake blood. You had to very specifically take out a ketchup bottle, put the ketchup on your hands, and then hit wherever you were shot, because I guess it was supposed to be less triggering that way.
They want you to laugh at school shootings and find them not that funny.
But that's the thing, though. It was actually very serious. And I remember it being treated very serious. But like, it was very strange in retrospect.
That is incredible.
I can't remember the name of the play. It was something called like Bang Bang or something like that.
Of course it was.
I can't remember. I'm sorry. I'm making this sound way funnier than it actually was.
I don't know that that's true. I think it might be just as funny as you're making it sound. Not Bang Bang sponsored by Heinz.
So yeah, that's my relationship to that.
My relationship to Columbine is that my mom wouldn't let me get a trench coat.
Oh no.
It didn't it didn't affect us in the same way in Canada because this isn't a reality for us.
Mm-hmm.
People don't bring guns into schools in Canada. Like, it's not even that, like, it happens less. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
Like, sure, you could point to, like, maybe, like, 2 or 3 times in the history of schools and guns in Canada, but, like...
As opposed to the United States.
This isn't a reality.
Yeah.
You aren't scared when you go to the mall or to a concert. Like, that's not a reality in your head when you live.
I was going to say, because here the reality never stops.
Yeah.
It's not like we call them school shootings for the most part, but like it's not like you get out of school and you're like, I'm safe.
Yeah.
Like you worry about this kind of thing every time you're in the public sphere here. And I was just saying to you guys today that like if I'm like tripping over my words and stuff while I'm presenting today, it's because I like barely slept last night because like just doing the research for this was like giving me nightmares. I kept waking up all night because like this, I guess you just don't realize until you sit down and think about it how much of a shadow that this casts on our lives here. Do you feel that way, Mandy?
What's that?
Do you feel that way? That like it, like you always have to be thinking about it?
I do. Yeah. No, when I'm in movie theaters, I'm always kind of like keeping an eye on where the exits are. If I'm in grocery stores, I think about stuff like that. I think about like if I'm in a public bathroom, like what do I do if someone comes in here with a gun? Because it's a public bathroom. There's usually only one exit entrance. I think about that stuff all the time. I've been thinking about school shootings specifically more often lately because my oldest nephew just started school. And my sister had a nightmare about a school shooting and called and like messaged me upset, understandably so. And like she's really stressed out about it. So like that's like a thing we have to be worried about. And he's 4. He is 4 years old, and it's not even like that is a guaranteed safety at all now. That's terrifying. And the 3-year-old starting next year.
That is the legacy of Columbine. It's like before that, we thought at least school was a place where people were safe, and it's not.
Yeah. Nope.
All right. Eric David Harris was born on April 9th, 1981 in Wichita, Kansas. His father was in the United States Air Force, so the family moved around a lot, but they settled in Littleton, Colorado in 1992. Dylan Bennett Klebold was born on September 11th, 1981.
What was the name, that last name?
Klebold.
All right.
Dylan's mother.
Sorry, I'm laughing at Caitlin's face. Like, okay.
I know.
I'm like, I guess that's a name. It's like very weird of them, but all right.
I breezed over that weird name because in the US, these are like household names. It doesn't even sound weird to me.
Oh, right. Gotcha.
Like specifically these guys' names. Yeah. Not like Klebold is like a normal name you hear people. It's probably the opposite now. I bet a lot of Klebolds changed their names.
I definitely would have.
Yeah.
Ditto.
Like, dude, if somebody with the last name Hootman went and did a mass shooting like tomorrow, I would be devastated. But I would change my name. It's not like being named Miller. It's not like Eric Harris. Like, there's lots of Harrises. You can't
Yeah.
be a Klebold and not have people recognize
Yeah,
that
people are
name.
like, wait, where do I know that name from?
Yeah. People are like, do you have any relation to? And yeah, no.
Yeah.
Dylan's mother, Sue Klebold, remembered that shortly after Dylan's birth, she described what felt like a shadow had been cast over her, warning her that her child would bring her great sorrow.
The fuck?
Yeah. And then he suffered from an illness as like an infant, so I guess she just assumed that that's what it was. But she like remembered this time where she was like, I just feel this like intense dread about this child. And of the four parents of the shooters, Klebold, Sue Klebold, has definitely been the most willing to talk publicly about her experience and to talk to press over the years. She was first interviewed about them in the Oprah magazine in 2009, 10 years after Columbine. And then she published a book in 2016, which I have not read, but I've heard it's wonderful, actually. And she gave a TED Talk in 2017, which I have seen. And she's kind of latched on to mental health activism in the years since, believing her son to have been homicidally depressed. I mention this because there is a sort of media bias or sympathy toward Dylan that we're going to talk about in part 2. And I think a lot of it, this is my personal feelings, I think a lot of it comes from the fact that Sue Klebold has been so candid about her son and her grappling with what he did. And I think therefore he is like more of a like three-dimensional person to most people reading about the case than the other shooter.
Yeah.
While Dylan was alive, his father, Thomas Klebold, had been a sculptor and an engineer, and Sue worked with disabled children. The Klebold family were also Lutheran pacifists. The killers met in the 7th grade. What is known about their friendship mostly comes from their journals and a series of tapes they'd made in the year or so leading up to the shooting called the basement tapes, because most of them were filmed in Eric's basement. But according to those that knew them, by their junior year, they'd become almost inseparable. Eric was described as very charismatic, and Dylan was described as painfully shy. Dylan also sometimes went by the nickname Vodka with the D and the K in the middle capitalized. Get it? Because it's his initials.
Oh my God.
Lame. And Dave Cullen's book suggested, based on interviews of people who knew him at the time, that he was an alcoholic. Vodka was apparently his favorite drink, and he was known to binge drink frequently. The killers were both big movie buffs and involved in school video production, in school plays, and as school computer assistants. So they were like creative nerds,
Yeah.
you know? Like literally some of the people that I hung out with in high school.
Yeah, I know these people.
Yeah.
They literally could have started YouTube channels.
They literally could have started YouTube channels. And they would have 1 million subscribers. Aside from the basement tapes, they filmed themselves constantly and made a couple of amateur short films, a couple of which have been made public in the aftermath of the shooting. Violence, death, and self-aggrandizement were frequent themes in their work. More than a year before the attack on January 30th, 1998, the killers were arrested for breaking into a van and stealing computer equipment. The plan for their attack became a central part of their friendship. They called it MBK after the Oliver Stone film Natural Born Killers, and they reference it and sort of journal out plans for it in the 18 months before the attack. But I don't know if it was something that they were actually serious about until 6 months before. And that time that they were arrested, they were just sent to like, they pled guilty to trying to like steal from this van, and they were sent to like a diversionary program. So like
Together?
I think so. I don't know very much about it. They were let out very early due to good behavior. It was literally just like they got sent to juvie for a little bit. We called it the Alternative Learning Center. But I know that is a relevant thing to bring up because the police were aware of them and they had a limited, but still they had a criminal rap sheet before this happened. So about 6 months before is when they actually started acquiring weapons. And I think acquiring the weapons is like what took this like plan from like a little inside joke, from like a little bit into like a real thing, like the way we started this podcast.
And then we like sat down and made a lot of.
We were like, just kidding, but what if?
Wouldn't it be crazy if we did a podcast? But like, no, we can't, right?
We can't.
That's insane.
And again, they could have been podcasters,
Get a hobby.
and they also
Literally.
probably would have been famous. Like, get a hobby. That's the moral of this story.
Yes.
Get a fucking hobby.
Yeah. Okay. They could have been true crime podcasters. They still would have got to talk about all the like dark, fucked up shit that like they wanted to talk about. But
Or they could have been like movie reviewers and talked about all these movies that they love so much, especially the fucked up weird ones. Like, there you go. Like, that's such a whole corner of the internet.
they always got to go for things that they hate instead of things that
I
they
know.
like.
You know what's really been chilling to me? Like, the last time I like seriously looked into Columbine, like, which was like the first time I read Dave Cullen's book, Columbine, I started like, I noticed how like eerily similar they are to JD from Heathers. And Heathers came
Yeah.
out in 88. So
Yeah.
Heathers came out 11 years before this. And then right now it's midway through October while we're recording this, and I'm watching through a whole bunch of horror movies and watching Scream again. Like,
Yeah.
it's uncanny.
I was going to say earlier.
Even their personalities are very similar to the ones from Scream. And Scream was
I
96.
would say, what
Yeah.
year was that?
So this was
Yeah.
before this.
That was a
Yeah.
couple years before.
Scream was not inspired by them. It was just like a premonition.
I feel like Scream understood
The
like,
culture.
culture,
Mhm.
yeah, in ways that a lot of other movies sort of like miss. Like,
Mhm.
especially like remakes and everything, they really try and hit that note that Scream hit, but there was just something very like poignant
Prescient.
about
Yeah.
every single one of the characters that they played. But
Mhm.
Billy and Stu, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Those two together, the second you were talking about these guys being besties and like growing up together, and one of them's like shy, one of them's more like
Mhm.
outspoken, I like
They are the same.
the first thing I thought of.
And they're movie
Yeah.
nerds. And their whole
Yeah.
plan for NBK was like to set it up in 3 acts like a movie. Like, exactly like the Scream Killers.
Yeah.
They never reference Scream, so I don't even know if they had seen it at the time that it came out. Like, it was not something that they wrote about.
They had
But
to
come
have.
on, yeah.
Everybody did, especially little
Mhm.
sickos.
I know. But I do think that that's why Scream has aged so well, is because it was
Yeah.
so prescient, and it was really like touching a nerve about the culture. And it wasn't like, sorry for like a little fucking Scream tangent, but like, it wasn't condescending to
Yeah.
90s teen culture. It was kind of like looking it in the eye. So both of them were too young to purchase firearms. So they enlisted the help of another senior, Robin Anderson, who would actually end up being Eric's date to prom 3 days before the attack. Robin was already 18, so they asked her to purchase them 2 shotguns and a carbine rifle at a gun show for them to use for target practice.
I love how it's like they were too young to buy guns, so they asked another student at their school
Who was like
who was not
3
too
months
young.
older.
Another child.
I'm like, these are high school students.
Yeah. A freshly not child. Barely.
Like, outside of a fucking apocalypse, you do not need a fucking gun. What are you hunting?
But this is so normal, not just for the whole country, but especially like
So
this part of
fucked
the
up.
world, this like Colorado and this like middle class suburb of Denver.
Mhm.
This is the same. I can't remember if it was Trey Parker or Matt Stone, but one of the South Park guys grew up in Littleton. And in the documentary Bowling for Columbine, he's like interviewed about growing up there and like the kind of like gun cultures and the religious culture of this very specific brand of like suburban Coloradan like gun culture that just kind of breeds this like cultural malaise in people.
Mhm.
So yeah, they just like go out and like get really good at target practice, and then sometimes you just think to yourself, I want to go kill somebody. And then luckily he just went and did South Park, and I guess killed like cartoon children over and over again, which is a healthy coping mechanism.
Yes.
But yeah. The killers both had part-time jobs at a Colorado pizza chain called Blackjack Pizza, and they purchased a Tech 9 handgun from a man called Mark Maines via one of their Blackjack Pizza co-workers, a man named Philip Duran. Duran, Maines, and Mains's girlfriend would all appear in a video with the killers that was eventually released to the public. It's called the Rampant Range video, and it's just them shooting out in the woods, like literally on a trail called Rampart Range, rather. Robin Anderson was never charged for supplying the killers with guns because, like, even though she was 18, she was a child. She was a senior in high school still.
Yeah.
But Duran and Maines would eventually be convicted and sentenced to 4.5 years and 6 years in prison, respectively, for selling guns to minors.
Did it seem like they wanted to make an example of them?
Mhm.
Yeah. I was just thinking the same thing.
Yeah, because those are pretty extreme
Yeah, I
sentences.
was about to say.
Like half a
Yeah.
decade. Yeah. For like Eric, by the time he did the killing, was 18. Like he turned 18 earlier that month. So yeah, these like guys in their early 20s were probably like, oh, he just wants to do shooting practice
Yeah.
with us. Well, I've got a gun I can sell to you and we'll go out into the woods and shoot together.
Yeah.
You never like
Mm-hmm.
you just never assume that like this kind of thing is going to happen, which is why you don't sell guns to teenagers.
Yep.
But guns were not what the killers were most interested in. The school shooting that would go on to inspire more than 2 decades of copycat crimes and become the template for the American mass shooting was actually a failed bombing because, again, they were inspired by Timothy McVeigh and they wanted to beat his kill count. The killers planned their attack in 3 cinematic stages.
Sorry, do you know Timothy McVeigh's kill count?
Oh, I said it in the last episode.
Yeah, I know it was
how many died?
high
Was it like
number.
500 died? It was something crazy.
Okay.
Timothy McVeigh. I said it in the Oklahoma City.
Okay.
Um,
I was just thinking, like, if they want to like beat somebody's kill count, I'm like, but
oh wait, I said 500. Okay, it was 168 deaths and 680 injured.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Okay.
Yeah, so they were looking to beat that.
They were going big.
They were going huge.
And also, again, with the whole, you mentioned Heathers earlier, I guess, spoiler for the movie Heathers, which has been out for a while, but the big climax of that movie is essentially a failed bombing as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's that's why it was like always so chilling to me. And he's also like JD and Heathers is like also this charming, angry man
Wearing a trench coat and
and looking cool.
Yep.
So the killers planned their attack in 3 stages. Act 1, a series of diversionary bombs would go off about 4 miles away, drawing police and paramedics away from the high school. And then at around 11:17 a.m., bombs placed in the school's cafeteria would detonate, killing hundreds. Act 2, the killers would pick off survivors from the initial explosion using handguns, shotguns, pipe bombs, Molotov cocktails. Basically, the idea was like anybody who was trying to run away from the school, they'd stand outside the school and just get them as they were coming out.
Yeah.
And just get them as as they're running.
And it was at this stage that they also expected to die, ideally of like suicide by cop, because they expected at some point around here, the police would realize what was going on,
come
come away from the other bomb, come back, and they'd die by suicide by cop.
Yeah.
Act 3, after paramedics, police, and media arrived at the scene and survivors were being evacuated, a couple of car bombs would detonate in the school parking lot, causing further chaos and devastation. The intended casualties would be somewhere between 600 and 1,500 people.
Jesus.
It was a school of about 1,600 kids.
Yeah. So they were looking to wipe out as much of the school as possible.
Yeah, that was the idea, is just like anybody who came into school that day, gone.
Jesus. It's like an eradication. That's fucked up.
And anybody who came to try to show up to help. That was the part
to save them.
that was supposed to be their like big coup de grace, was like, oh, you think you're safe and the paramedics show up and now we're going to kill the paramedics too.
Yeah.
But luckily they were some stupid fucking teenagers and this was just something that they were writing about in compositional notebooks. They'd planned the attack for Monday, April 19th, 1999, the anniversary of Oklahoma City. but they had to push back a day to April 20th because they couldn't get enough ammunition. Because again, stupid kids. That the saving grace here is that teenage
Like,
boys are overconfident and bad at planning.
You are trying. Doing it the day after is so pathetic. Like, at that point, it's cringe. Like if like we're the Halloween killers, it's like, then why did you wait till November 1st? Like,
exactly. There was this rumor because by a total coincidence, April 20th is Hitler's birthday. So
my
there's
God.
been a myth for years that they did it to celebrate Hitler's birthday, but they never really mentioned that. I will say both of them were interested in Germany
Yeah,
and
I
the
bet.
Nazis. Yeah.
Of course they were.
I will say in their defense, Timothy McVeigh was a white supremacist. He was dedicated to the cause. I think these kids were white supremacists in the sense that every wannabe edgy white teenage boy, I should say, is,
Yeah.
They were not dedicated Nazis. They just were interested in fucking documentaries about Hitler. And I don't think they even knew that they were doing it on Hitler's birthday.
No.
The killers missed their first couple of classes on the morning of Tuesday, April 20th. They were first spotted by a friend of Eric's, Sarah Leary, in the Columbine parking lot around 7:30 a.m. Eric hugged her and asked her why she was so dressed up, and she replied that she had a school function later that morning and it would be off campus. And I just keep thinking of how awful she must have felt.
Yeah.
That is so chilling to me. And it's so chilling to me that he was just so friendly and was like, oh, you look nice. Where are you headed? As he had duffel bags full of pipe bombs in his fucking car.
Yeah, you have a great day. I'm about to go kill all of our friends. Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad that you have a function off campus.
Right.
I wonder if he even would have cared if she had been oh, I'm in the play today.
I don't know. It really depends on who, because there were some friendly acquaintances of theirs, as we'll get to, that they did kill, and then there were some that they warned.
Oh, okay.
So it really I don't know how much he felt about her. I don't know if he was do I get to kill you when you look like this?
People.
Yes.
Okay.
At least one, and we're gonna get to that too. Around 11:10 a.m., another friend, Chad Laughlin, passed Dylan as he was pulling into the parking lot, and Chad and a friend were leaving the parking lot for lunch, because if you can leave for your lunch hour
Off
or whatever,
campus, yeah.
And Chad flipped off Dylan as they passed him in the car, as a fun little hey, fuck you, we're friends kind of thing, which is also chilling to me, because if he was in a bad enough mood that day, he might have killed him. The killers parked their cars loaded with explosives on opposite sides of the junior and senior parking lots. So they were kind of flanking the building.
At least they were smart enough to do that.
Yeah, because the idea was
maybe not at least, but I'm surprised that they didn't just park the cars on top of each other.
Yeah, no, it was they could enter from this side or this side, so we'll park a car at either side. An on-again, off-again friend of Eric's, Brooks Brown, spotted him when he came out for a cigarette and asked Eric about missing a test in class that they shared that morning. Brooks is the one that we're going to discuss a little bit more in part 2. But according to Brooks, Eric told him, Brooks, I like you now. Get out of here. Go home now. And Brooks left school immediately.
Did he understand what was happening?
He didn't know what he was going to do, but he knew that it was serious and knew that it was bad. There are
do you know if he called anyone or did
Brooks
anything?
Claims that he ran home, and on his way there he was knocking on people's doors and telling them to call the police. I think investigators say that there's only evidence that he just ran straight home.
Okay.
So who knows? He was also a teenager.
I was just trying to think of what I would do.
I know.
In that hearing that.
It's so hard.
Yeah, because I'm
would I leave?
And also, these are teenage kids,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily expect a scared teenage kid to act in a most rational form.
I don't think he bears responsibility.
No. I was
But
just
also,
like,
I look at it and go like, oh, I would. Yeah.
I was trying to picture what I would do, and I was like, why am I trying to do that? Like, let's find out what he did.
What you would do in the time before cell phones as well.
Yeah,
it's so easy now to just call 911.
Yeah, that's the other thing too, is you didn't have a cell phone. So, yeah.
Shortly after 11:14 a.m., the gunman, dressed in black leather dusters, which look like trench coats, and wearing wraparound sunglasses.
They leave that part out on purpose. They want these little fucking worms to sound cool, and then we find out that they're look
fucking
like
Ray-Bans. Recording a TikTok in the front seat of their car.
No, this is very like Planet of Dance or whatever the fuck that song that recently came out was. That like 80s throwback.
Yeah, the Planet of the Bass.
Yes.
I don't think I know this song.
Oh, Mandy, you would love this.
I'll have to check it out.
R.I.P. Mandy. She would have loved Planet of the Bass.
All right, and now we're going to take a break in the episode to listen to all of Planet of the Bass, the 10-minute cut.
Patreon exclusive version.
So they were wearing black leather dusters, wraparound sunglasses, and they were carrying 2 duffel bags into the school's cafeteria. Each contained a 20-pound propane bomb set to go off at 11:17 a.m. during a lunch, like not a lunch, but like ABC. Yeah,
right?
Because it's like a school for like 2,000 kids. So a lunch was when the cafeteria was the most crowded, according to Eric's notes. The killers returned to their cars to wait for the explosions. The bombs never went off. So at around 11:19, the killers had to resort to plan B. But there wasn't really a plan B because they were a pair of overconfident teenagers who hadn't planned it out very well. So they just walked into the school and started shooting. A witness heard one of the gunmen shout, "Go, go," and then the shots ran out. Richard Castellato and Rachel Scott were sitting on the grassy knoll between the gunman and the west entrance when they started shooting. Richard was hit with 8 bullets but survived, though he suffered critical injury to his spine that would leave him disabled for life.
Jesus.
Rachel was hit 4 times by bullets from Eric's 9mm high point, taking a fatal bullet to the head. Rachel was one of the victims that was actually known to the killers. She and Dylan had known each other since kindergarten, and he was a techie in a school play that she was in at Columbine High School the previous year.
What the fuck?
Yeah. She was a theater kid who wanted to be a famous actress, and there's a video of her as a child saying, "I want to be famous."
How old was she?
When she died, I think she was 15 or 16. If she'd known him since kindergarten, no, she would have been 17 or 18 because she would have been in the senior year.
Okay. So like same age as him. Yeah.
Rachel was also very spiritual, and in their basement tapes, the killers mocked a Rachel who was probably Rachel Scott for always talking about Jesus.
Is this where that myth comes from?
Oh, we're gonna talk about that in part 2. We're gonna talk about that.
Targeted Christians.
But no, that's a different girl, actually.
Okay.
2 different girls. Lance Kirkland and friends Danny Rohrbach and Sean Graves had just left the cafeteria through the side entrance, and the gunman targeted them next. Lance said later that he didn't remember hearing gunshots, but he was hit in the leg and the chest, and Danny was also shot in the chest and fell back into Sean. Lance turned to run and was shot in the leg, causing him to fall to the ground. Sean ran past, taking several shots to the back and abdomen before a gunshot wound to the leg downed him just outside the door to the cafeteria. Like, this is fucking carnage. This is a horror movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Several other students who witnessed this ran for cover and were shot at. And I will say, there's dozens of 911 calls from this day, but some of them are from like neighbors of the school, because these, again, nobody had cell phones. So like these mass waves of these children were just like running out of, before the cops got there, were like running out of the school and running to neighbors' houses and just knocking on the door and saying like, call the police. So these strangers were just like inviting these like groups of like 20, 30 kids into their houses and calling the police. And then they would just like all sit together and watch the news.
Jesus.
So it's very surreal because like the early 911 calls from like these neighbors are like so blasé. They're like, yeah, hey, I've got some kids here. And they said there's been like a shooting. Like they have no idea like what is
Yeah.
going down in their neighborhood until a few minutes later when the media arrives. 15-year-old Michael Johnson was hit, but he was able to reach the outdoor athletic storage shed where he hid with 3 other uninjured students who had already made it there. Mark Taylor was shot and unable to flee, so he played dead. When Sean Graves became weakened from his injuries, he would also rub blood from his wounds onto his face and play dead. Anne Marie Hochhalter was also shot and injured while eating on the grassy knoll. She fell to the ground, unable to move, and she would also be disabled from her injuries. As they went, the gunmen lit and threw homemade pipe bombs onto the school roof toward the grassy hill to the right and down into the parking lot. Witnesses reported hearing one of the gunmen say, "This is what we've always wanted to do. This is awesome." The killers turned back to Daniel Rohrbach and Lance Kirkland. Both were shot point blank in their faces. Daniel died, but Lance incredibly survived.
Wow.
Yeah. 18-year-old senior Nick Foss was in the cafeteria when a girl came running from outside screaming, "Someone's shooting, someone's shooting." While other students ran away, he ran outside to see what was going on. He could see 2 guys on the ground, one of whom had, quote, half of his face blown off. He told investigators later that day that he ran over to the boy who had fallen near the stairs, which was Daniel, but he shook him and realized that he was dead. Looking up, he saw the 2 gunmen at the top of the stairs shooting down at the people below. He recognized them from his 5th period psychology class, though he didn't know either of them very well, and Foss felt a shot graze his head. Nick Foss would take shelter in a bathroom in the teacher's lounge with 2 other students, 3 teachers, and a cook. At 11:24 a.m., Coach Dave Sanders and school custodians John Curtis and Jay Galentine ran into the cafeteria and directed students to get down, to hide under the tables, and ushered them out of the cafeteria when they determined that the coast was clear. Then Dave Sanders ran upstairs toward the library. Teacher Patty Nielsen was on hall monitor duty when she heard the commotion outside of the school, and she looked out the west entrance and saw a male student carrying what she thought was a toy gun and assumed that a school video production was being taped or that it was some sort of a prank, so she told them to knock it off. Yeah.
Imagine
Very
like
funny.
looking
Accidental
up and she's like, "Hey, like, you kids, knock it off! Don't make me come down there."
She's got like one of those rain sticks to make you quiet. She's like, "Hey,
Quiet
wait
coyote."
Quiet coyote." Yeah.
Student Brian Anderson, who'd been told to evacuate and headed for the west entrance, also spotted the shooters and assumed that they were holding prop guns. So he'd actually known the gunmen from film class, so it didn't seem unusual to him that they would be carrying prop guns around.
Yeah.
And the gunman then shot at Patty and Brian, and metal fragments sprayed into the corridor, hitting Patty in the shoulder, forearm, and knee, and hitting Brian in the chest. Patty ran to the library, and Brian followed her. At 11:25, Patty Nielsen made a 911 call from the library checkout desk. That's like one of the really famous 911 calls. It is.
Yeah, I think I've heard that one before.
Yeah, it is harrowing, but it's also like she's such a badass. She's like, "Get out of the desk, kids! Get under the desk!" And I'm like, "Yes, teacher queen, I love her."
Yes, Patty.
And
stand you.
she stays on the phone the entire time, even when the killers come into the library. Like the 911 dispatchers can hear what's going on because she keeps them on the line.
Mm-hmm.
As Dave Sanders passed the library, he motioned to some of the hiding students to stay put, and spotting the gunman, he attempted to run back the way he came, but one of the gunmen fired at him, and he took 2 bullets to the neck.
Jesus.
Dave was able to crawl to the corner of the science hallway where teacher Richard Long helped him into classroom Psi 3. The students sheltered in the classroom administered first aid to Dave Sanders and dialed 911. Emergency dispatch told them that help was on the way, and over the next 3 hours, no one came. The students in classroom Psi 3 took off their own shirts and used them to stymie the bleeding. There was like a pile of like every shirt that a child was wearing, and they all took them off and just like traded them out one by one. In desperation, student Deidre Kuchera put a sign in the window of the classroom that read, "One bleeding to death." And I'm going to show you the sign.
Yeah.
It's like one of the iconic images to come out of Columbine. Help wouldn't come until around 2:30 p.m. At one point, the students gave up and snapped the legs off of a table to make a gurney for Dave so that they could try to move him out themselves, but it was too late. Dave would end up bleeding out nearly 3 hours after being shot. Dave Sanders pulled his wallet out of his pocket and showed the students pictures of his daughters. His last words were, "Tell my family I love them."
Yep.
At 11:29 a.m., the gunmen entered the library. This is where they really took their time terrorizing students. Witnesses hiding in the library said that when the gunmen entered the room, one of them said, "Everyone with a white cap or a baseball cap, stand up, and all jocks stand up. We'll get the white guys in the white hats." So like white hats were a sports thing at Columbine.
Okay.
And when no one stood up, one of the shooters was heard to say, "Fine, I'll start shooting." The first fatality in the library was 16-year-old Kyle Velasquez. Kyle had suffered a stroke as an infant, and he was mentally disabled. He was sat at a computer table in the library when he took a shotgun blast to the back of the head and died instantly.
Jesus.
Yeah. The gunmen shot out the library windows and fired at policemen who had arrived on the scene and started evacuating students. One of the gunmen fired under the tables, one of the tables, injuring Patrick Ireland, Daniel Steepleton, and Mackay Hall. Buckshot actually passed through the left side of Patrick Ireland's brain, instantly paralyzing one side of his body, but he miraculously survived and would spend the months after Columbine relearning how to read and walk, and he'd graduate valedictorian.
Jesus.
Wow.
So Patrick Ireland was known as the boy in the window. Are you familiar with this?
No.
That sounds really familiar, but I can't remember the specifics.
So in the hours after the massacre, when no one was coming to help, going in and out of consciousness, Patrick used his one good leg to push himself over to one of the shot out windows and escape. It literally took him like hours.
Jesus.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Yes. And I am going to send you the video of him escaping. It's amazing.
Ooh.
Yeah, you're not going to feel good this episode. This is a Reddit link. I'm so
I've
sorry.
already cried a little bit. It's that kind of episode.
But this is amazing. Like, this is one of the most resilient people who has ever lived.
Oh my God. And it's so high up too.
It's on the second story. Like, at a certain point, he says he couldn't see. His eyes were like flooded with blood. And at a certain point, he felt the breeze and he knew that he was like close. And somebody started shouting up at him, "Don't move." And they drove a car over, like they drew like a big truck over, and some SWAT teams stood on top of the truck, and pulled him out so that he wouldn't fall.
He was kind of like about to fall, and you see him go back in, and now I see the truck.
Yeah. So he's blind. He's paralyzed on his left side. Like,
I know all I'm saying is like Jesus, but I actually haven't like. I know that there are like books and podcasts and like movies about this, but I've sort of intentionally stayed away from it because I didn't need to know, and do like finding out more about it just out of curiosity was not like the vibe. I skipped like all the true crime podcasts I listened to. I always skipped the school shooting ones because they still, even though that wasn't something I had to be afraid of, they still are so much more like visceral, and like partly because it's children.
Yeah.
But also because like there is something absolutely terrifying of somebody coming into a place full of children and doing this. And so I didn't know everything that you're telling me, I did not know about.
There's
Okay.
yeah, I
So
think
I'm just like, oh, okay.
a few years
This is a
like
lot.
after Columbine, I might have fallen down a little bit of a rabbit hole at one point because I think there were like it was like a documentary. Maybe it was the Bowling for Columbine movie. I'm not sure, but like I remember
Mhm.
hearing some of the like the phone calls and stuff. But that was like years after the fact, and I remember seeing the initial like news footage when it happened. But this video I didn't remember seeing. And maybe I did, and I just forgot. But like I did kind of intentionally not seek it out for a while because like
Yeah.
it's children, and like at the time that this happened the internet was very different, not that it didn't
It's very
exist, but
new.
it was very
Yeah.
new, and like we were poor, so like our internet sucked. Like so it wasn't quite there wasn't quite the same ability for me at the time to like do a deep dive in the way I could now, where it's like so easy to just
Yeah.
like I think a lot about like what that would have been like if Twitter had existed and social
Mhm.
media had existed in the same way back then as it does now. Like you would have been on Twitter seeing people's phone images of this and been inundated with it
Yeah.
on such a different level, and which is just fucking
There would have
heartbreaking
been
to
like
think about.
TikTok
Like,
lives.
yeah, exactly. And because like that's what's happened with some of the more recent shootings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I totally agree with you. That I think that there's no need to seek out like a a lot of these very sensationalized stories.
Mhm.
I will say that I do think Columbine is an important like historical event to know about just because it is the genesis of this entire era,
Yeah.
to the point where like it was I was fully an adult before, because I was sheltered from a lot of this, and I don't remember when this happened, and I was fully an adult when I found out that it happened in my lifetime, or like at least in my like within when I should have been able to remember it happening. Like I thought it was something that happened either before I was born or like when I was an infant, because like by the time I was like, you know, um conscious and like experiencing the world as something that happens outside of myself,
Mhm.
it had already entered the lexicon as a synonym for tragedy.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Columbine
Another
just means
Columbine.
tragic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do think like it is it is a tragically like remarkable world event in the way that like I think you need to know about like uh 9/11 to understand like so much of like, you know, 2000s culture.
Right. And this, you said this was 99, right, when this
99.
happened. So
Yeah.
that's only 2 years later that 9/11 happens.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually the freshman class in Columbine graduated in 2002.
Mhm.
And the freshman class in particular got really, really fucked up, because
Oh, I bet.
they only experienced high school as Columbine.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and then, you know, their entire high school years were under a microscope. Uh, After exchanging fire with police, one of the gunmen turned back to the kids hiding in the library and killed two more, Steve Kernow and Casey Rugskiger. On the 911 call from the library, one of the gunmen can be heard yelling, "Yahoo!" One of the gunmen spotted two girls hiding under a table, Emily Wyant and Cassie Bernal. He slapped the table and bent down and said, "Peekaboo," before shooting and killing Cassie Bernal at point blank range.
Jesus.
The recoil from the shotgun caught the killer in the face, breaking his nose. Bree Pasquale was crouched down out in the open just south of the table under which Cassie had been hiding. There was no other place for her to hide, and when one of the gunmen turned her way, she was completely defenseless. Gun aimed at her, he asked Bree, "Do you want to die?" Bree answered, "No, please don't shoot me. I have a family and a fiance." He laughed at her and then finally seemed to notice his nose was bleeding. "Dylan hit my nose," he said, according to Bree Pasquale. He started laughing again. "Everyone's going to die," he said, then added, "We're going to blow up the school anyway." The other gunman then called his attention to two boys hiding under another table, and the killer forgot about Bree and moved to join his fellow gunmen. It would be 4 days before Bree would sleep again.
Yeah.
Under the other table were Matthew Kircher, who was a football player, Isaiah Scholes, who was an ex-football player and a wrestler, and Craig Scott, the younger brother of the first victim, Rachel Scott. Isaiah was heard by witnesses to have told the shooters that he was scared and wanted to go see his mom. One of the killers called him the N-word and then shot and killed him. Then they shot and killed Matt Ketcher. Craig Scott laid in the pool of his friend's blood and played dead. One of the Craig Scott, who at this point doesn't know that his sister is dead, laid in a pool of his friend's blood and played dead. One of the shooters then threw a CO2 cartridge, a homemade bomb, under the table where Micaiah Hall and Daniel Steepleton were with the critically injured Patrick Ireland. It landed on Dan's thigh, but he was too afraid of being shot to move, even though he could see it was lit. So Micaiah Hall grabbed the bomb and threw it back out towards the gunman, and it exploded midair without hurting anybody.
Jesus.
Yep. Literally a horror movie. Like,
Yeah.
scarier than a horror movie.
Because it's real life.
And it's like more brutal. Like, again, in fucking Scream, they're just like stabbing people.
And also, not that it can't be in a movie, but it feels also more senseless too than in a movie, because a movie is like there's a plot, it's about entertainment, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But like this is just killing children. You know, and the idea of a child having to pretend to be dead, lying in a pool of blood, like just
next to his dead friends.
That's messed up.
Yeah. When they weren't shooting at people, the killers were walking around, banging on tables and bookcases, swearing and mocking people. They were reveling and causing terror. And we're going to talk more about like the myths that have come out of Columbine in the second part. But among them was like this debate over like whether or not the killers were bullied. And I will say, and like whether or not like the killers were hunting jocks. They were not targeting any specific groups. We know that. They were indiscriminately killing. And yeah, when they first entered the room, they were like, let's kill some jocks. When they saw a black kid, they called him the N-word. When they saw a fat kid, they called him fat. When they were just like, when they saw a kid, literally, they were just like, they were working with whatever they had. Like one of the kids that they killed had glasses, and the very last thing they said to him was something like 4 eyes or nerd or something.
They were bullies.
So they were just working with what they had, and they were being the bullies at this period of time. One of the gunmen then approached the trophy case and fired at it, and then fired under a table next to it, leaving Mark Kintgen with bullets in his head and shoulder. So like I've already said that like 15 people die, but like so many critical injuries.
Yeah.
So many injuries, so many critical injuries, so many lifelong injuries. And this is not something that I talk about, but this is like, I couldn't possibly fit everything about this case into 2 episodes.
Yeah.
If you go and read Dave Cullen's Columbine, it's like the definitive like breakdown. It's very long. In the aftermath, there's a lot of lawsuits, and like one of the like really tragic, upsetting things is like the kids who survive and have like ongoing injuries and mental health problems aren't awarded as much money as the families of the kids who died. And on the one hand, you're like, how do you compensate for someone losing their kid? But on the other hand, those kids are dead and they don't need any more money. And like some of these kids are disabled for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And those medical bills, I'm sure, are horrendous, even if they are getting some deferments or whatever. Like, I'm sure.
Yes. So some of the
debt is ridiculous.
So the parents of some of the kids who survive, but with like critical injuries and like to say nothing of like the therapy bills, start to like have it out with the parents of the kids who passed away. Like it is, the way it wrecks this community is indescribable. One of the parents of one of the kids who survives but is, disabled by her injuries ends up killing herself.
Oh, fuck.
Jesus.
Yeah, one of the moms ends up dying by suicide. Because this kind of thing is impossible to live with or deal with. So the gunman then turned and shot at students hiding under the table to his left, injuring both Lisa Kreutz and Valine Schnur with the same bullet. He then fired 8 times in rapid succession, followed by a 9th shot, killing Lauren Townsend, who had been beside Val Schnur. Val, who had been forced out of her hiding place by the shot she'd taken, cried out in panic, "Oh my God, help me," several times. And one of the shooters, who was reloading his weapon at the time, asked her if she believed in God. And she floundered in her answer, saying no at first, and then yes, trying to see what he wanted her to say.
Yeah.
Right. What answer is the right answer to him? Yeah.
And then he just asked her why, and she said it was because it was what her family believed, and she crawled back under the table and pretended to die, and he left her alone. Nicole Nolan and John Tomlin were then shot and injured. John tried to crawl out from under the table at that point and was shot and killed. Kelly Fleming had been trying to hide behind the same table with Lauren Townsend, but there wasn't enough room, and she was shot in the back and died instantly. One of the killers shot under the table, hitting Lauren Townsend again, who was already dead, and injuring Gianna Park. And at around 11:34 a.m., the shooters moved to the center of the library, where they reloaded their weapons at a table midway across the room. One of them then caught sight of a student hiding under a nearby table and, recognizing him, told him to identify himself. The gun aimed at his head. John Savage identified himself. He was an acquaintance of Dylan's, and he asked Dylan what he was doing, to which Dylan replied casually, "Oh, just killing people." John asked if they were going to kill him too, and Dylan told him to get out of the library. John left immediately, escaping through the library's main entrance. At 11:35 a.m., Daniel Mauser was shot at close range and killed. And Daniel Mauser was the one with the glasses. They mocked him and called him a nerd and then shot him in the face. Mm-hmm. Then both gunmen opened fire on a table, after which Jennifer Doyle, Austin Eubanks, and Corey DePuter were hiding, under which Jennifer Doyle, Austin Eubanks, and Corey DePuter were hiding. Jennifer and Austin were injured. Corey was the last person killed. After this was this very strange, creepy period where the gunmen just sort of wandered the school, shooting into rooms, but not really at anyone. They even allegedly made eye contact with students in classrooms and didn't kill them. They had enough ammo to kill hundreds of people, but they kind of seemed to have lost interest. And investigators have suggested that maybe the adrenaline had just worn off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, it had been a couple hours. So
at this point, it had been less than 40 minutes.
Oh, 40 minutes. Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it started around lunch, right?
It started at 11:17. We're at 11:35.
Right. I was counting the time of them arriving in the morning and getting set up, which I mean you would have some adrenaline then too, but yeah, no, that's a good point. The shooting itself,
right? Yeah. And it was hours before anybody made the SWAT teams made it into the school because they didn't know how to respond to any of this. But the actual massacre was less than an hour.
Yeah.
The time it takes to explain what happened is double the time that it took to happen.
Right. Longer than.
Because that's how guns work.
Yeah.
Yep.
They threw a few pipe bombs and Molotov cocktails around and went back to the cafeteria to try to detonate their propane bombs. And if you've ever seen the really famous footage of them walking around the cafeteria, the security footage, this is when this is. They go back in there, they kind of try to shoot at their propane bombs to set them off.
Yeah.
And one partially detonated, and it caused a small fire. Witnesses hiding in the cafeteria heard one of the gunmen say, "Today the world's going to come to an end. Today's the day we die." They drank from water bottles students left behind and just like fired at nothing for a bit. Like they fired into the ceiling. Like they were just kind of wandering around aimlessly.
Mhm.
Then they headed back to the library around noon and fired at first responders again between 12:02 and 12:05. It seems pretty likely that they were trying to die of suicide by cop.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But neither the gunmen nor the SWAT teams and police officers managed to hit anyone. And the killers were dead by suicide by 12:08 p.m. The entire massacre lasted less than an hour. Nothing like Columbine had ever happened before. There had been school shootings, like I said, but they had overwhelmingly been targeted attacks with limited casualties. Nothing like this kind of indiscriminate killing. And the shock waves would be felt for decades to come. In part 2, I'm going to discuss the Columbine effect and some of the myths surrounding the massacre. But I wanted to close this episode out with a quote from Daniel Mauser's dad, Tom Mauser. Many members of the public can give you the names of the 2 shooters. Not many more can give you the names of the victims. So I want people to know that Daniel Connor Mauser was a great kid. He didn't deserve what happened to him. No, he was not a bully. He was not a jock. He was a kid who was sitting in the library. He's not someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was in the right place. He was in school. He was in the library. And the last thing that I want to leave you with is this. Their names were Cassie Bernal, Steve Curnow, Kelly Fleming, Matt Ketcher, Daniel Mauser, Daniel Rohrbaugh, Dave Sanders, Rachel Scott, Isaiah Scholes, John Tomlin, Lauren Townsend, and Kyle Velasquez. You've been listening to Respect the Dead, the podcast where we don't. There are a couple ways to support us.
Patreon supporters get bonuses like extended episodes with audio from the cutting room floor and adding cadavers to our suggestion cemetery.
Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and we might read it out in the show. Follow Respect the Dead on all platforms at _Respect the Dead.
Thanks so much for listening. See you next Monday for another worm feast.
I'm Kaylin Conrad.
I'm Mainely Mandy.
And I'm Hoots. Bye.
Bye.